things don't always go your way. Anybody besides me? Yeah. Things don't always go the way you plan. Sometimes you do the best you can. You think you're doing everything right, and then you get punched in the mouth. And that's kind of what happened to us. And I'm going to point something out on the screen just real fast. Forget about the stuff that I do and all that kind of stuff. But I do want to point out there's 5 C's that come out of my speaking company, Big, Bold, Brave, that I live by. These are my core values. I'm going to hit on 2 of these today, but I just want to tell you what they are. One is courage. We're going to hit on that. Creative genius, simply put, and I believe I can prove it scientifically and biblically. I'm not going to do it today, but you have a creative genius in you. You do. Every single person in this room has a form of creative genius that the Lord put in you. Then there's compassion. We all need to act with compassion. Collaboration, that's one of the things I love about impact players. We are never going to do anything great on our own, ever. It's just never going to happen. And then conscious leadership, we're going to dip into that one a little bit as well. So first I want to talk to you about my inspiration. This is where we're going to get caught up on my story. 3 boys, and this is my oldest, Gabriel. And Gabriel was, he was an amazing kid. The only way I can describe it is, by the time your kids are teenagers and they start talking back to you a little bit, and they know everything, you kind of expect that. Now, when they're 5, you don't expect it as much. And that's kind of how Gabriel was. He's always very, very smart, communicated on a very high level at a very young age. And so, he was truly what we like to call a go-getter, right? And about the age of 7, he went up into a plane with his Uncle Danny, a small plane. And it was like his version of meth, if I could say it that way. It just got in his blood. He just absolutely loved it and made a decision that he wanted to be a pilot. And so, and you guys that are dads, 7, 8 years old, you're thinking, okay, great, you're going to want to be all kinds of things in the next 10 years. Well, he never let go of that. And ultimately, by the time he was 14 years old, we live here in McKinney, just up the road a little bit, and there was a club that was formed that actually created some opportunities for young men and women that are in high school that want to be able to learn how to fly, to be able to do that. And ultimately, at the age of 16, he ended up flying solo before he even drove a car, which was kind of a weird experience watching him go up as a parent. Anybody had their kids learn how to drive? Anybody besides me? Yeah. Imagine they step into a plane and take off. That's a weird experience. And so by the time he was 17 years old, that's the youngest you can be if you don't know, to become an actual licensed pilot. He became a licensed pilot, and he was living his dream. And then the night of September 23rd, 2019, so this is about a little over 5, we're going on 6 years ago now, he took what would have been a normal trip. He was taking a friend from here in McKinney up to Arkansas to drop them off, to take them back to school, and then just return home. And about 8 o'clock that night, we got a phone call that he had disappeared off the radar. Ultimately, after a very, very long, hellish night, we ended up discovering that he did indeed crash and he lost his life. And so, devastating blow. Always going to hit me. And so I'm not here to share just pain, but I am here to share some inspiration, because there's some things that happened when Gabriel passed and what we needed to do to be able to continue to live out. And it started the next morning. I want to talk to you a little bit about courage. There's going to be moments in your life that are extraordinary, and they're not always going to be warm and fuzzy moments. And I found myself with 2 other sons who were still in bed. They had no idea what had happened. My middle was 14 at that time. My youngest was 9 at that time. And I was now commissioned with that morning when they woke up to have what I call the impossible conversation and let them know what had happened to their brother. And I can only tell you this. I don't know all the exact words that I used, but I can tell you this. I knew in that moment that we were going to have to set the course. By that time, I'd been in ministry. If you don't know, I'm also an executive pastor. I've been in pastoral ministries pretty much for the better part of the last 20 plus years. So I'd been in pastoral ministries for about 15 up to that point. And you guys all have experiences with pastors. Pastors have different roles. My roles have always involved being kind of knee deep in people's lives. I've been in multiple hospital rooms while people have passed away. I've seen stillborn. I've seen a lot of stuff you don't want to see. And so because of that, I've been on longer journeys with people, and I've seen that a lot of marriages, a lot of families completely implode when something like this happens. And so we made a decision that morning, and I'm going to tell you what it is, but I also want to point out before I say it, it doesn't mean things were easy. It doesn't mean it's been a really difficult journey in many ways. But we made a decision that morning, and this is what I want you to hear in my story, because your story is different, and it may even have some similar components. Maybe you've been through something very similar to what I've been through. But you really only have two choices on this planet when things really hit you. And so what I told my other two sons, Joel and Liam, I said, listen, boys, we have two options. We can either let the tragedy of Gabriel's death absolutely become our identity and just kill our destiny. Just cripple it, because we're so trapped in just the tragedy of his death. Or we can choose life. I believe there's a scripture that talks about this, right? You choose life or death. We're going to choose to honor his life by living the way he lived. And Gabriel was one of the most courageous people I know. He truly was. He was one of the most courageous people I know. So what is courage? I like to define words. We're going to talk about being courageous for a minute. The word courage itself is mental or moral strength. I can tell you, you're going to be challenged with that. If you're not, even right now as we're sitting here having breakfast, you're going to be challenged at times for mental or moral strength. There's going to be times where it's to venture, persevere, withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. We're all going to face that. Maybe you're facing it right now. It's not a matter of when or how, or if, I should say. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And then the third one is take risks. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. But being courageous, here's what I want you to know about it. It's already in you. I believe that God already created you this way. And I believe that it's already actually, tangibly, physically, spiritually inside of you. You know, courage is not one of these things where you just begin to kind of grapple in the dark, hoping you can grab a hold of something. It's something that God has already placed inside of you, and then situations put a demand on it, and you have choices on whether or not you act courageously. I'm going to share just a few scriptures just to give you an idea, and we're a group of men, so my third one is going to speak just to men. But you know, the Old Testament, and I'm not going to get too much into the Old Testament, we know there's different scriptures that talk about being strong and courageous, Joshua being one of them, right? He was told, hey, be strong and courageous. Have anybody ever noticed in the Bible, whenever it talks about be strong and be courageous or don't fear, why is he saying that? Why is it being said in that particular moment? Because they're scared to death, right? Because there's something that's either happened or is about to happen, and God is saying, listen, fear cannot reside in you. You've got to make a choice to live courageously. And so that's why in the Old Testament he talked about that. But what did Jesus say about courage? I'm going to go to three quick scriptures. Matthew 9:2, and I'm not going to draw a lot of context for sake of time, but I think it's going to be self-evident. 9:2 is, and behold, some people brought to him, this is Jesus, a paralytic lying on a bed. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, this is very interesting, take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven. Now, this is an extraordinary story. If you've read it, he goes on to physically heal the guy as well. But that take heart there, that's the way I'm reading out of the ESV. Most of your versions are going to say take heart. But that word in the Greek is be courageous. So this is very interesting to me. He's giving him salvation. That's what he's saying, right? He goes, your sins are forgiven. But he's saying, in order to receive that, you better learn how to take courage. Then in verse 9:22, we see another story here. And this is, Jesus turned and seeing her said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. So here's another instance of Jesus healing. But interestingly enough, before he heals her, he says, be courageous. So even to step into your God-given destiny through receiving salvation requires you being courageous. For you to see the miraculous things happen in your life, whether it's through a physical healing or whether it's through something miraculous he does in your business or your life, it requires you being courageous. And it's attached to your faith. And then the last one I'm going to read here is 1 Corinthians. Now, this is not Jesus being quoted here, but it's 1 Corinthians 16:13. This is Paul, and it says, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith." Listen to this. "Act like men. Be strong." Woo. And then it says, "Let all you do be in love." Yeah, come on. We ought to get excited about that. How many of you know God is saying, act like a man?
Right.
And so, listen, guys, I need to be really clear on this because I have limited time as well. I have not done everything perfectly at all. Certainly not in my lifetime, and certainly not since I lost Gabriel. There's been some blips on the radar. You know, I've had challenges at different times with my faith since then as well, and you know, questions that come and stuff like that. So I'm not speaking to you even remotely close from a place of doing all this right. But I can tell you, we got to recalibrate when we get off track. And that's one of the reasons why something like this with impact players is so important. There's been men in my life throughout this last 6 years of me stepping into new things. There's been, let me tell you one thing that happens when you lose a 17-year-old son who happens to be courageous and does a lot of crazy things. You begin to recognize there's elements in your life where you're a coward. That's the first thing. You know, I wrote a book about this. I have some in my car. I didn't even bring them in because I decided, you know what, I'm not here to sell anything, so it's in the car. You want one, you can tell me later. But I wrote about this in the book because it was true. I looked at the way he approached his life, even at such a young age, and I realized anything that he felt was a challenge, anything that he said he wanted to do, he did it. He taught himself how to play guitar. He became an incredible photographer, even though he wasn't technically doing that only professionally. People were hiring him professionally. I mean, the dude just did whatever he wanted to do. And I had things in my life. I had wanted to work in the corporate realm besides just being in the church for many years, whether it was through executive coaching or whatever. Never stepped out to do it. I'd been asked and told to write a book for 15 years. Never stepped out and do it. I had areas in my life where I was living as a coward. And here's what happens, man. I was just successful enough in some of the things that I was doing to live a very muted life, to not really do everything that God had called me to do. And so losing Gabriel actually caused me, again, I just mentioned I wrote a book. I eventually did write that book. I've been working in the corporate realm as well as an executive pastor for many years. I'm going to touch on that just a little bit because I have a point here in a little bit. I want to give you guys some real tools as well. But courage is what you need, but it's inside of you. It's God-given. It's Spirit-filled. It's literally God's Spirit in you that wells up and rises up. But I will tell you, sometimes the situation demands it and you just step into it. And sometimes you need the people around you to uplift you, encourage you, and call you to acting courageously in whatever you're facing. It also involves taking a lot of risk. I want to share this really quick here. Howard Behar, many of you probably don't know Howard Behar by his name, but you know what he did. He was the president of Starbucks, and he actually started Starbucks International for the founder of Starbucks. And so he helped take Starbucks from 28 stores to 1,500 and across the world. And he has this quote. He ended up writing the foreword for my book. And so I chose to honor him using this one time. And I looked at it and I'm like, man, that's really good. Because being courageous requires risk. So this is a quote from Howard, and it says, did I put that up there? Yeah, okay, good. It says, to risk, to laugh is to risk appearing the fool. Now, Warren, you did a great job of getting us started today with that, right? We're going to take a little risk here. I'm going to give you some dad jokes. And then, you know, if you were one of those like AI babies, we'd have been laughing even harder. Anybody seen those? Those things are hilarious. If you could have figured that out, you know. But laughing is important. To weep. Guys, I'm going to tell you, I've shed a lot of tears in the last 6 years. And I'm not ashamed of it. Part of the process of being courageous, part of the process of leading my family through this has been being very self-aware of the emotions of the grieving and the pain process that we've been through. So with my other two boys, there's been moments where I have absolutely, cried and been very vulnerable with my emotions in front of my wife. Why? Because I needed to show them this wasn't just to exercise the emotions that I was feeling. It was to show them that it's in you too. You need to be able to feel your way through the pain. It's okay. Real men do cry.
Amen. Right.
But we cry unto a purpose.
Yeah.
I've never allowed myself, and this is something that the Lord has really done, I've never allowed myself to get into this mode where I stay there. There are times when we're thinking about something, we're telling stories about Gabriel, we're feeling something, it's his birthday, because every single year, his birthday rolls around, every single year, September 23rd rolls around. And there are times when I could be just driving down the road, I see a little plane fly across, I can laugh. And I think, man, it's amazing what he's been able to accomplish and what he was able to do. And then there's other times where it makes me tear up and cry a little bit. We got to embrace every part of how God created us. So weeping is risking appearing sentimental. It's not sentimental, it's strength. To reach out for another is to risk involvement. Guys, impact players do that. To place your ideas and dreams before the crowd is to risk loss. Some of you guys run companies, some of you guys are entrepreneurs. How many of you guys know that it's risky to do that? And in order to do that, though, you got to share it with some folks, right? So you got to be willing to do that. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To live is to risk dying. I can definitely tell you that's been a big part of my journey in the last 6 years. Is when you lose someone very close to you, especially when it's your son and things are so upside down because you expect to be the one who, hopefully another 30 years or so, give or take, but, I expected to be the first one to go. So I can tell you every day, and I don't live every day as well as I would like, but I take every day, I don't take it for granted. I don't take it for granted because none of us are guaranteed, and I hope this doesn't sound dark, but none of us are guaranteed 5 minutes after we leave here.
Amen. Come on.
So we got to be really intentional about the way we're going to live. To live is to risk dying. To hope is to risk despair. To try it all is to risk failure. But to risk we must, because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. Yes. Nothing. I love Tom's story because he took a major risk to be open. He took a major risk to turn himself into rehab. He took a major risk to finally tell his wife the truth. And look what happened. Look at the reward of living risky. And then the last thing it says simply, the woman, the man who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, is nothing. So we got to be willing to take some risk. Okay, now I'm going to start wrapping it up here. I got a couple more minutes, but I want to talk to you about conscious leadership. This is one of my core values. The definition of conscious leadership for me is being self-aware in our personal life and leadership practices. Now, why is this important? Because often we're just going about our day and we don't even know how we think. And I know that sounds funny. I like to say it this way. We think we know how we think and we don't. And that sounds kind of, that's babble. What's he talking about? What I'm saying is we have trauma. We have things that have happened early in our lives. We have things that have happened maybe in recent years that create trauma, and that affects your subconscious mind. And then your subconscious mind goes to work looking for the easiest path. That's why sometimes we end up making really bad decisions because it's an easier decision. Or we think it is, until we, unfortunately, the fallout comes, right? And then we begin to realize maybe that wasn't so easy after all. But our subconscious mind drives a lot of things. And so we have to, there's a reason why Jesus talks so much about renewing your mind, meditating on the Word. Okay, we all know that. I don't think I need to walk through that. We need to get in the presence of God. Okay, that's an important thing. We need to know our Word. Guys, we know all this stuff. But what we don't do near often enough is just stop. I want to give you something. I want to give you some, a lot of what I do in the corporate side of things is neuroscience driven, but I'm telling you, and I don't have a lot of time to make the case, but I can prove it. We can hook up later, we can connect, we can talk more about it. But I'm telling you, neuroscience is proving the Bible. It's 100% proving the Bible today, and it's proving the way this whole idea of renewing our mind, having the mind of Christ actually works. So I want to give you a couple of quick stats here for those of you who lead in any way, and I would commission you to say you already lead at least yourself. And I'm looking around this room, I imagine you all lead a lot more people than that. Listen to the brain changes that take place when you actually, and I'm going to make a point here, I'm going to talk for a second about meditation and reflection. I'm talking about literally just taking 5 minutes a day to just get in a quiet place and stop and think. Now, I'm going to give you some real neuroscience and results that happens from just meditating and thinking without inviting the presence of God. I want you to imagine what happens when you invite the presence of God to be a part of this. Listen to this. So, brain changes from meditation. Meditation and daily reflection, it physically reshapes your brain, literally, especially the prefrontal cortex. I'm going to hold this up because I feel weird bending down like that. The region that's responsible for your decision making, your self-control, and for complex thinking. So regular practice strengthens your neural pathways involved in your focus, your emotional regulation. Can I tell you guys, if you want to live courageously, if you want to be a conscious leader in your marriage, in your families, in your businesses, you better learn to develop your emotional intelligence. To me, that's one of the highest skills that we're going to need to develop in the world that we're living in today. Anybody agree with that?
Yes.
Come on, thank you. All right. And making leaders more adaptable and resilient. Listen to this. Meditation reduces the size and reactivity of the amygdala. That's your part of the brain. That is the brain's stress and anxiety center. It literally shrinks that. And that helps leaders remain calm under pressure and less reactive to stressors. Listen, as a husband, you better learn how to be less reactive. Because there's a huge difference. When you're led by the Spirit, you respond to things. Okay? Anything outside of that, you're going to react to situations, and chances are pretty good you're not going to react well. Anybody besides me? Anybody in their marriage ever react? Anybody? Yeah. By the way, my wife is full-blooded Puerto Rican, so I can only react so far before she cuts me. So I got a built-in. All right, enough of that. And then two more things I want to say about that, and then we're going to start wrapping it up. Both meditation and reflection engage your brain's default mode network, or some call it the DMN, which is linked to your self-awareness and understanding others' perspectives, which are key leadership skills. And then last, mindfulness and reflection help leaders become more self-aware, less biased, less prone to snap judgments, supporting better decision-making and openness to new ideas. One of the things that I do, I work with a company called Excellent Cultures on the corporate side of things. One of the things we do is we bring in these very technical, very scientific assessments. They're not cheap. We typically work with very large companies. And here's the idea, and I'll give you one simple example. I'm working with an aerospace company right now here in McKinney. Just happens to be the CEO is a friend of mine. And what we do is we end up taking these assessments or having so he's the CEO, and we'll have the C-suite and then the senior leaders right below that. They will take this assessment. What this assessment does, it was created by some PhD statisticians about 40 years ago. It's called the Circumplex. Some of you guys may have heard of it. It's the gold standard of measuring corporate culture. What this thing measures, and I love the fact that we're called impact players today. What it measures is, it's not a personality thing. It's not any kind of like a character trait thing. It literally measures the impact of the leaders themselves. In other words, when these people that are below them, in this case, the C-suite and the senior leaders, when they take this, it spits out 12 behaviors that clearly illustrate the actual impact of how that leader is causing his people to behave. Part of the reason why I'm bringing that up is 72% of the CEOs over the last, because I haven't been doing it for 40 years, but the founder of my company, it started in Seattle. But I had a little bit of beef with my wife, and she had asked me a question. Let's see if this lands with anybody. My wife asked me a question that I was not prepared to answer. And I realized I started to get kind of heated and defensive. And she's like, she shut me down pretty quick is what happened. It was very, very fast. She's just like, you don't need to talk to me that way. And she just walked away. I literally went into the room that I like to spend my quiet time, and I sat down, and I'm like, all right, Lord, show me. Why? Why did I react the way I did? Why does it bother me? And what I realized, and he showed it to me, because I didn't realize the way I was thinking. What I realized is there's still a part of me that struggles with not being enough. And what he revealed to me when I sat and just took time to meditate on why I behaved the way I did, that I reacted, instead of just saying, you know, baby, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that yet. I got defensive instead, because there was that part of me that was defending myself because I wanted to appear as though I already had it all together when I didn't in this particular case. I'm giving you just a really simple example. But guys, we got to be people who are conscious leaders. We got to be aware. You need, and here's the last thing I'm going to end with today. You need to get honest feedback from others. That's what this circumplex is all about. You've got to get real feedback. Well, listen, you've got to do this in your life. You've got to do this in your marriage. One quick example, and then I'm going to wrap it up. We've been married 22 years. So this was about 17, 18 years ago, give or take. I had a phone call and I found out that we had some friends. It was an older couple, and my wife had actually known them from the time she was like 12 years old. And the husband in this story, they had been married over 25 years. They were missionaries, believers, seemingly very, very solid people, right? And one day, he literally walked into the room to his wife of 25 plus years. He had a couple of kids and said, I'm not satisfied. I'm not having an affair, but I'm done. They live in Southern California. I'm moving to Thailand. I'm leaving you. And he did. And she was left to pick up the pieces, completely in shock, being completely unaware of how it even happened. To her, there were no signs of that. And it got me thinking. My marriage, I think, is okay. I think I'm doing okay as a husband. I'm really not sure. And so I decided that night, I went home and I sat with my wife and I said, hey, I need to ask you a question. And she said, well, sure, what? And I said, how am I doing as a husband? How am I doing? And she just kind of laughed and she's like, well, you're doing great. And I'm like, no. I mean, like, for real. And I told her why, and again, she was deeply impacted by this guy doing what he did. And she said, okay. And, I was fortunate that day. I heard what I wanted to hear. It turns out I was doing okay, right? But we actually incorporated that into our normal rhythm. And so even I do a lot of work with couples, and we've done a lot of stuff with marriages. And so one of the things I talk about is having that, I call it the State of the Union address. You need to get feedback in your marriage. You need to ask really hard questions and find out if what you think is going on is really going on. You need to do that with your kids. I started doing that with my boys. I started asking them, literally, hey, listen. Now, I think it's understood, but I need to make this very clear. You have to create a very safe space for this to work. They have to trust, and same thing in the corporate world. There has to be, actually in the corporate world, these are all anonymous. So these CEOs don't know who's actually said what. But in your family, in your marriage, they need to know that they can trust you for them to be real. And that's why impact players is so important. Because you're going to need a group of men. You really do. There's things that we can talk about as men you just can't talk about in a mixed group. And you need to be able to sit down and you need to be able to be known. I love Tom was talking about just getting to know people's first names. Man, that's definitely the first step, right? Kind of hard to go deep with somebody you don't even know who they are. But it's really important that we get to know each other so that we can begin to ask each other the really tough questions. And so that we can get feedback, because we need feedback to get better. And that's what I want to leave you with today. What these guys are doing is absolutely amazing. I love it. I don't just speak anywhere, and I don't mean that in any kind of ego at all. That's not what I mean. I'm just a little guy doing my little part in the kingdom, so I don't mean it from that angle. But you know what? You all made a choice today, and there's a bunch of other things you could be doing right now. So I picked my time wisely. And so when Warren first asked me, are you willing to do this? First of all, I trusted him because I'd gotten to know him over a pretty lengthy phone call, and he was very vulnerable. And then I began to look up, troll, because I'm sure you trolled me too, right? I began to troll and see, and I began to realize, wow, these guys, and no pun intended, truly are having an impact in the lives of men. So I want to encourage you, wherever you're at in this, I know this thing needs to grow. I know we need to pop this thing out and get it into different cities, and whether it's within your church or you do it outside the church, whatever that looks like, these guys can help you with building that. But this is a big part of living courageously. This is a big part of becoming the leader that you were truly created to be. Is you've got to have some real talk with real men. You've got to get some real feedback in order for you to be everything God has created you to be.